afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're on day 2 of our regional dialogue, and people are still coming in. Maybe I'll give you another 2-3 minutes so we don't lose anyone. Okay, just by way of introduction, yesterday we focused on climate smart agriculture as a way of building better and resilient agriculture and food systems. And so today we moving on, it's the same theme, but focusing now on the agriculture to nutrition nexus. And essentially the major question we're asking is, of course, how can agriculture deliver better on nutrition? And of course, we have COVID-19 in the backdrop of all this. So it's almost to go into an extent where you can't have any conversation and COVID-19 doesn't get into the discussion. So, but for the benefit of everyone, including those that are joining us for the first time today, would like to ask our Chief Rapporteur from yesterday, Dr. Ndumiso Mazibuko, to just take us through some reflections from day 1. Then I'll advise you how we proceed from there. Dr. Mazibuko, if you are ready, you can go ahead and share the reflections from yesterday, just so that people can pick up from there and we can put things together as we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And good afternoon, colleagues. So my job here today is an easy one. It's just to make sure that I was listening yesterday in terms of the proceedings. So I'll just give you a reflection on a few pointers, summarized pointers on what we were discussing yesterday. As Prof highlighted, the main theme for the dialogue is saying building better and resilient agricultural food systems. So if you look at yesterday's topics, they were mainly focused around issues of climate change and its impact around building better food systems. So in yesterday's proceedings, we received opening remarks from the FANAPAN CEO and head of mission, where he indicated that in terms of the state of nutrition, it's a continental challenge, and that we have to work together to address this challenge. Having noted that the current interventions have not made any significant changes to this challenge which we are facing as a continent in terms of the state of nutrition. He further highlighted that from the Malambo annual review report, we still did very much worse off in terms of our scorecards, and then we need to work towards correcting this. And he further indicated that the solutions do not only lie in one specific area. Our strategies and solutions should be across the value chain. Across the value chains, in order to make sure that we can make a significant role in addressing the issue of nutrition challenges. We also received opening remarks from the FANAPAN chairperson, who further highlighted that this year's theme is key into and is aligned to into addressing the issue of transforming Africa's, the continent's agricultural sector. He further elaborated on the issue of COVID-19, and then that post-COVID-19, this gives us an opportunity to better address the issue of agricultural food systems in Africa. We also received comments from the colleagues at COMESA who further highlighted the importance of addressing the issue of food systems. food systems, and who further indicated that 90% or more than 90% of sub-Saharan Africa's agriculture is reliant on climate change, and we better need to come up with ways of coming resilient into climate change and further addressing the issue of climate smart agriculture. He further stressed the issue of emphasizing on youth participation in agriculture, and that we need to focus on that. We further received a presentation from Tembi, who indicated that continuous population growth, urbanization, change in diets, and issues of climate change are putting pressure on Africa's food systems, and we need to work towards addressing this. And then it further indicated there's a need for more diverse food to be available and accessible at all times. She further indicated that the solutions to some of these things are not only one-folded. So we should look at them in 3 dimensions, that being the issue of biophysical factors, looking at issues of productivity, looking at behavioral role, looking at the players in the agricultural sector doing the correct thing, and then also the issue of economic dimensions. So those were some of the opening remarks we received. And then we also received opening remarks from the farmers, from Mr. Zunga, who further indicated that to address food, we need to work towards addressing food security, not only at national and regional level, however, also at household level. And he further indicated that the issue of risk sharing within the agricultural value chain, that the risk should not only be a burden onto farmers, but the risk should be cut across along the value chain. We also received a presentation from Ms. Neri, who further highlighted the importance of data in addressing some of the issues around climate change. So the presentation emphasized around the issues of agrometeorology and issues of data around climate change. We also received a presentation which highlighted the importance of irrigation in addressing issue of climate change, and further indicated that we should not look at irrigation only as the issue of water, but also look at issues of time management, issues of soil fertility, and that in some of the projects, in some of the areas where the project was involved in, they had seen smallholder farmers move from producing just your subsistence crops and moving into more of your commercial crops. So it highlighted the importance of irrigation, and also in some cases resolving your social and gender conflict issues around those irrigation schemes. And then we also, the issue of greenhouse gases data was also highlighted, that it becomes critical for countries to develop policies and research frameworks which look around the issues of greenhouse gases, and then how we better address the lack of data and the gaps which exist across the countries around it. And then we also received a presentation which highlighted what is currently happening in Kenya around the dairy industry, and that currently less than 10% of the dairy of the milk is being processed, and then there's a need to look in towards addressing that, and then also highlighted the need of building data around the dairy industry in Kenya. We also, in conclusion, we also received a presentation which highlighted the importance of evidence-based policies in the agricultural sector in order to address some of the challenges, and then that poor programs in the agricultural sector should be cautioned around climate change. So it further emphasized some of those aspects which were earlier highlighted by some of the speakers. In that note, colleagues, that was the first day in a short and brief summary of what were the outcomes of yesterday's day one of the dialogue. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mazibuko, for bringing us up to speed on what happened yesterday. So that just some housekeeping issues as we move to listen to the keynote address. We are going to be taking questions at the end of the presentations from the keynote and then the 5 panelists. So if you have any questions, please put it on the chat and we will pick those questions up. And if you want to indicate who the question is addressed to, if it's a general question, just pose it as such. And we're hoping that we'll have time to attend to those questions later today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Joshua Laikena from Kipra. Kipra, of course, is one of the Kenyan node hosting institution for FANAPAN, and Joshua is the node coordinator for the FANAPAN activities in Kenya. Now, just as before Joshua comes in, the topic he's going to address is the impact of COVID-19 on food systems and food security. Now, well before the issue of COVID came up, you'll recall that earlier this year, we had the State of Food and Nutrition Security, Food and Nutrition report, the global report which came out. Now, this report was compiled before COVID came into the scene, but even before then, we already had challenges with the food system. We have issues of affordability, the fact that if you want to eat well and eat proper, a balanced meal, it's actually out of reach of many people. Now, superimpose on that the COVID issue, we had from Tembe yesterday, how it disrupted things and that it caused all sorts of havoc and continues to do that. So this is a very topical issue, but this is all around the issue of food systems, agriculture, delivering better on nutrition, even under shocks like COVID. So I'm going to hand over to Joshua to take us through this keynote. And Joshua, if you are ready, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I am trying to put on the camera. It's not able to put up. I can be facilitated. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all the viewers and those who are participating. And my name is Joshua Laikena from the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. And I'm going to take ourselves through what the reflections that are likely to spill over throughout this session in the afternoon. And we are looking at agriculture and nutrition nexus. And from where we are, it's becoming difficult for me to move, please. To move my presentation.
Use the arrows on your keyboard.
Yes, they are not active. Oh, good. It's able to move now. So the first thing we need to ask is, in the midst of COVID-19, which has really devastated economies in the entire world, what do we see in terms of food security and the food systems? The impact the COVID-19 has had in the economy will take a lot of years to recover, but then we expect it to have a lot of impact on food systems. But it is also important because Sustainable Development Goal number 1 and 2 insists on reducing poverty and also hunger in the world. But also when you look at the statistics from the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, you see that the world is nowhere near in terms of trying to conquer hunger, because we could be able to see that we have around 8.9% of the people who sleep hungry, but also we have another 135 million people who suffer acute hunger. The implication on this one is that we are likely to see these numbers increasing because of the impact of COVID-19 in terms of the economies of Africa. When we look at the cases for COVID at the end of September, we can be able to see that the cases in Africa reached the peak around June, July, and they are continuing to go down. However, as we look at America, Southeast Asia, and Europe, we could be able to see that they are experiencing an escalating cases of COVID, and also some of them having maybe the second incident of lockdown. And the major thing to ask on this one is, what is the implication of this on Kenyan African economies? Because if we have countries that depend on export or import of food from these regions, then we are likely to see them getting affected heavily by the second lockdown. But also, it is also important in terms of African food system to know that the effect of COVID-19 has affected international movement of goods and persons, and therefore trade. Trade is one of the ways goods are able to be moved from one region to the other. And therefore, as I've mentioned there, countries have been able to be affected by this in terms of access to goods. But also, apart from the healthy concerns of COVID-19, we see food system being affected by a pandemic in a negative way through all the four pillars of food and nutrition security. That is availability, accessibility, and utilization, and also stability in terms of prices. And therefore, we need to look at how this pandemic has affected food access and nutrition, because we have a very strong relationship between economic downturn and the food insecurity, because it also threatens food access in various ways. That is on income access and assets, where jobs are lost, especially in the agriculture sector that relies on numbers in terms of labor to be able to produce. We also have disruption to availability because of close down. We note that almost all African countries and varied measures of closure of the economy, and it actually could have affected food availability. But also we need to see, we see that because of the closure, loss of job, we find that there is shift in demand in terms of people moving to consume cheaper food that are less nutritious. But also because they are earning less, they are not able to afford better food for them to be able to get nutritious food. And these are the channels I was talking about. This chart is just to explain those channels that I've talked about: supply disruptions, net income, and the rest. Now, when you look at the Kenyan context, we note that agriculture is the largest contributor to GDP, constituting a third of GDP, but also it will contribute half of the labor force in the country. So when we find restrictions in terms of closure of movement of goods, and especially in the horticulture sector, we find that there is various, there's massive losses of jobs. But also we find that households dedicate a large share of their disposable income in terms of food. That is that the urban and even the rural at 48. So the situation was that even before COVID-19, we had 1 in 3 individuals falling under minimum daily calorie requirement of 2250 as per the requirement. And therefore, this requirement or this minimum requirement was more worse in the rural areas as compared to urban and pre-urban and co-urban. And therefore, it becomes very necessary to be able to track how COVID-19 has been able to affect food security situation and nutrition in Kenya and by extension, Africa in general. Yep, in Kenya here, the government instituted several restrictions. While the COVID was moving on, the government also instituted several programs to be able to help the population and the economy to be able to recover. And because of that, we find that closure of the economy affected household incomes because of reduced hours of working, loss of jobs, and therefore food people could not be able to move food and be able to access food. But also the complexity of the COVID-19 impact with the government measures makes us to be compelled to analyze how income and food security was affected in the country. We have 2 projects in Kenya. One is National Information Platform for Nutrition, and this is a 5-year program that is funded by the European Union. I am not going to talk about this one, but I'm going to concentrate on the work that is published that can be able to be found in the European Commission website and the KIPRA website on COVID-19 impact on economy short term. And we looked at how it has affected the economy in general and the government measures also. And then we looked at these measures and COVID, how they have affected the welfare and nutrition status. So details of how we constructed this research can be found in that report. And therefore, I'm going to concentrate on what we found out. So we looked at the lockdown between April and June, and we found out that lockdown could have led to 5.6% reduction in GDP, but the largest contributor came from labor productivity, where we had more than -4% contributing to the drop in GDP. And I mentioned earlier that agriculture is one of the area where we have mass labor in that area. But also we found that the absorption reduced by 6.7%. This is attributed to the people not being able to purchase movement of goods and the rest. But in general, the employment reduced by 11.9%. And this one also points to agriculture being the main culprit. And the export also went down by 8.1%. But when we look at this one for the reduction of remittances, it also led to depreciation of the Kenyan currency. And therefore, it made the goods that are important because we are net importer of food, especially maize and rice. And therefore, the prices could have gone up and therefore made it difficult for food access. Now, when the government instituted the measures to be able to cushion the economy, we looked at those measures and we could be able to see overall the lockdown and contributed to 4.2%, with the total supply reducing to 4.1 and the consumption 4.5. But when you look at all the measures for the short-term recovery, the tax reductions that was instituted as one of the measures to cushion the population boosted the internal demand because population and more disposable income to use. But also we'll be able to see positive changes in other sectors. We have imports and because of public spending, but also the resulting improvement in household income determined the food sector. People are able to to access food, and therefore could be able to contribute to the largest discovery of that sector. But we also found wheat, rice, well, and in that category, having the lowest effect of recovery of the measures of the government. But also a number of food categories, meat products, dairy fish, fruits, were also consumed. The consumption went up, meaning that there was a change in the composition of demand, which we mentioned. And as we look at the close down because of COVID, we could be able to see some of the other issues that are coming up, either obesity, and this one is also related to nutrition. On welfare, we found that the closure contributed to 7.7 decrease in welfare overall for all the Kenyans. But all the most interesting thing, and what we need to note here, rural households were the hardest hit at 8.2%, meaning that accessing food was very difficult. The largest reduction also was found in same-skilled workforce, meaning that those who do not have skills could not, the measures that were undertaken could not be able to help those who are not in high skill. But also, we could see other changes. For example, vegetable and poultry were able to be consumed. The consumption went up, and the largest reduction, perhaps because we could be able to see in the agriculture sector where the lockdown was prohibiting the movement of goods, then it was available for consumption locally. In nutrition status, again, we found within microsimulation to look at diet energy consumption as per the requirement international requirement. And we found that the worst food consumption impact was obtained if the government never acted at all. But also, when it acted, this was reduced, the DEC was reduced from 3.32 to 1.26 within government intervention. But now, the most thing that actually also we need to look at in relation to nutrition, we found that the households that are under child stunting, they had further decrease in calorie intake, even within government intervention. But also, those households were also impacted to have unbalanced diet, increasing from 1% to 3%. Now, what does these numbers mean in terms of achieving food security and nutrition? Food security, when it is mentioned through daily diet energy consumption and the macronutrient, is exposed to the pandemic, meaning that people are not able to get enough of those nutrients by the combination of food that they consume. But also, food and nutrition is also closely related to reduction of poverty and hunger, which are the goals of the UN SDGs. Now, in Kenya, we have a blueprint that we call Kenya Vision 2030 that focuses on reducing poverty in Kenya, which means that the gains that we had achieved for the last 2.5 years, have been wiped out by the lockdown and the impact of the COVID-19. So what we see here is that even though the government took the measures for the economy to recover, it means that the recovery is not even in all the sectors. Now, what we can be able to carry home, or we can be able to see, and I expect my colleagues who will be presenting after this to focus on them, is to see that with all the information that we have, we see that efforts through food income support program that aimed as the lowest population that is affected need to be taken. They are key so that the economy can be able to recover and then people can be able to achieve food security and nutrition. The second thing that we can be able to see is that the pandemic is going to generate additional undernourished people all over the world, as FAO is actually approximating it to move from 83 million to 132 million. But also in our individual economies, country economies in Africa, this is likely to be replicated. And therefore, designing of the measures that require government to target interventions towards the sectors that are fragile, such as tourism, such as agriculture, are very key. And therefore, when we will be discussing this and having reflections, I will be expecting to hear how we can be able to transform food system, perhaps by doing what we call biofortification, to be able to tackle the issue of nutrition. But also we need to see now farmers at the farm level, how do we need to see farmers contributing to nutrition, so that now at the farm level, at the family level, at the household level, we can be able to achieve that. But also I would be willing to hear what solutions do we have in terms of digital solutions to be able to monitor community health. We have seen that we have technologies, we have watches that you can be able to wear, and then it can be able to remind you when you are dehydrated. Can we be able to develop those technologies that we can be able to monitor? Even when you put that gadget, it can be able to tell you when you have less nutrient of a certain diet in your body, so that you can actually be able to do that. Those are the issues that we need to see, and also how to deal with the shocks. We see now the shift in Kenya, for example. We had more producers and less middlemen, but now what we are seeing is that because where the income is in the middle level, we find that those people who are farmers, they have now become the brokers, being able to get food from the farmers and then sell to the consumers. And therefore, those who are people who are producing are becoming fewer and fewer. And how do we need to reverse this? And how do we need to tackle it? And those are my reflections, colleagues. And thank you very much for being given this opportunity to be able to make these remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Thank you for staying right on time, and a very interesting presentation, very practical. Yeah, I think you've paused at the end, very nice way to finish, because you're setting the stage for the next speakers. But yeah, for me, the things that are coming out there is, of course, the impact of COVID-19 on all the dimensions of food and nutrition security, as you have pointed out. For example, issues of availability, access, stability, etc. But also, the one point that I saw there was that the coping mechanisms of those that are disadvantaged. One of the coping mechanisms, which is really not desirable but understandable, is to go for cheaper and less nutritious, foods, which, yeah, you can understand that because you're trying to address the issue of hunger. So the cheaper food, high calorie, high fat, that will obviously take care of your hunger in the short term, but you end up with hidden hunger. So we have a challenge there. But more importantly, also the issue of data still comes up. How do we track the needs of the population? Not just at a national level, but we need to go down to the household level. But some people would even say, go even down to the individuals, because we know that there are challenges even with household, intra-household food allocation. Our customary and traditional practices where maybe women and children don't get to eat meat or the better parts of the diet, and the men who probably need it least, culture would say that the men must be well fed. I don't want to get into that, but I'm sure some people come and address that issue. So we have a number of issues here that we need to look at. Very interesting data from Kenya there, and I think it mirrors what has been happening in most other countries. you know, the first responses that governments took was to focus on health issues. I know in countries where overnight farmers' produce was destroyed because they were violating, you know, COVID movement restrictions, only for governments later on to wake up to the fact that, hey, we needed to eat. So the farmers must carry on and do their job, and this becomes an essential service fairly early on. But we'd already lost time, and the food system had already been disrupted. And I like the fact that you show the importance of government intervention, especially using the fiscal muscle when it comes to taxes, supporting household incomes, so that you could you know, create demand and also protect the economy at the same time. So yeah, the question of the fact that we've lost all the gains that we've made on most critical indicators on food and nutrition security. At the same time, we see that the farming community are the hardest hit, the people that produce the food. Because of course, nobody is immune now to the supermarket culture. You can't produce everything you need. So you need to buy some food to come, you know, supplement what you produce. So we have a number of issues to deal with there, from the policy dimension right down to the household level as to how do you cope with such a situation. So that's the picture that you've painted for us. And I think it's quite obvious the impact of COVID, what it's done and what it continues to do. So thank you very much, Joshua. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. And that's one of the questions that you posed. How can we make sure that, because most of our diets are based on cereals, so that's a major part of our diet. So how do we make sure that we create a system where these cereals are packaged in a way that they provide a substantial amount of nutrients, not just calories? So it's important that we look at that. So it's all in the name of transforming food systems. And we're going to have Donald Mavindidze from the Biodiversity Alliance, who is going to talk about the case for biofortification in the advent of COVID-19. It's good that that's answering one of the questions that you posed. So Donald, if you are ready, please, you can go ahead and upload your presentation and take it from there. Donald, are you?
Yes, I'm just trying to load. Just give me a second.
Okay, thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, no. We can.
Is it the presentation?
Yeah, you just need to go to your slide mode. Thank you. Sure.
Can you see the right screen?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, just give me a second. All right, okay. Good morning.
You've gone out of the slide show mode. Just if you can just use the whole screen. Thank you. Okay, that's good.
A second, I'm having some problems here. Just give me a few seconds.
Donald, just make sure that you don't click on anything else once you go to present mode.
Okay.
Yeah, so once you're there, don't try to see us on Zoom. We can see you. So you can just keep going next to go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for that. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, those who are watching from all over the world. Good afternoon and good evening. My name is Donald Mavindidze, and I'm the Regional Director for Harvest Plus here in Africa. And I'm going to be talking to you about more nutritious staples. As you have just heard there, how can we get more nutritious staples, especially in the advent of COVID. The statistics are dire, as we have just heard from the last speaker. Even before the advent of COVID, more than 2 billion people around the world were suffering from malnutrition or hidden hunger, primarily from the developing or the middle and low income countries. And COVID has actually made that even more worse. With the advent of COVID, it is estimated that there's more than double the number of people are going to be facing a food crisis. You had the figures of between 83 and 125 million people going into acute problems with nutritious foods and acute hunger. So the problem is even getting worse. The pandemic has brought about a lot of restrictions, especially at the onset. People could not move around, and people could not access the nutritious food. I mean, people in the face of these kind of shocks, people end up relying a lot more on the cheaper staples. So we know that during these kinds of times, nutrition is very important. You know, we know that nutrients such as vitamin A, zinc, and iron are important for a healthy immune system. They are the building blocks for a healthy immune system. But during these times, due to the restrictions, people do not have access to these, to a diversified diet, to different types of mineral nutrients, because obviously because of the problems that we have with the pandemic. What ends up happening actually during this kind of times is, Dr. Simba has been saying, is that communities and vulnerable, especially those vulnerable communities, end up relying on cheaper staple foods, particularly those in the rural communities. They end up just relying on what they grow in the local area. So supply chains have been affected. So it's really a lot of problems that we have with the current situation with the pandemic. What we actually need is a really efficacious and effective intervention that can be scaled up quite quickly. You know, we need something that is that people are doing on a regular basis, something that is localized, something that is sensitive to people's activities, such as agriculture. You know, most of the people are involved in agriculture activities. So what is it that they can do that can help them to be able to continue to take in the vitamins that they need? Just to say, maybe just to roll back and say, you know, there are quite a number of interventions that are out there that help to mitigate micronutrient deficiency. And so they include supplementation, which is the taking of pills and powders. There's industrial fortification, and then there's also biofortification, which I'm going to talk about in more detail later. However, at Harvest Plus, we believe that a nutritious and diversified diet is the ideal situation for people to be able to live, to get all their nourishment from the food. But we know that this is a real problem, especially in those vulnerable communities. They do not have access to different foods, you know, different diverse diet made of fruits and vegetables, made from animal sourced foods, you know, made from cereals. In most cases, they mainly have access to the cereals. They only have access to calories, which are the main staple. And so looking at this, we at Harvest Plus have been working on an intervention. And for the past 15 years, we've been working on a concept known as biofortification. And you might be asking, what is biofortification? Biofortification is the breeding of nutrient density in your commonly consumed staples. So, because staples, as we know, are cheap and widely available, they form the base of what is consumed by most people globally, be it rich, be it poor. So we thought that if we can enrich these staples, it will be easier for especially the vulnerable communities to be consuming their micronutrient requirements, at least partly or even in full. And so we have been promoting, working with different partners, we've been promoting, developing staples made from biofortified crops. And so what we have done is we've really built on top of the progress that has been made through breeding over the years by including those nutritious traits on the high-yielding crops. And these crops are actually also climate smart. And one important thing that we knew we had to do was to make them as public goods so that they can be available widely. And we've got different types from vegetatively propagated crops all the way to hybrids and open pollinated varieties, so that a wide range of communities can have access, and concentrating more on staples. And we've made quite a bit of progress. Up to now, we've bred and developed a number of crops, and we're tackling the three elements that we found to be of public health concern. You know, we've got your iron, you've got your zinc, and your vitamin A. And under the iron, we've got things like pearl millet and beans. You know, look at that. For example, the pearl millet, iron pearl millet can supply up to 80% of daily iron needs if consumed regularly. And look at crops like sweet potato, orange flesh sweet potato. It can supply up to 100%, even cassava, up to 100% of daily vitamin A requirements. So we have done quite a lot, and we are still doing this work, working with the various partners, different CG centers, working also with the National Agriculture Research Systems of different countries. We've managed to develop more than 300 varieties. They're either in development or have been developed already in more than 40 countries, the majority being in Africa. And so why do we believe in biofortification so much at Harvest Plus? We believe in biofortification because, one, it is food-based. It is based on the crops which people eat on a day-to-day basis. And so for those resource-poor farming households, they are able to afford, they're able to grow and actually consume these biofortified crops. The other reason why we are so excited about biofortification is what Simba was talking about there, especially for a continent like Africa, where there's all these cultural norms, you know, where men have access to the more nutritious foods, such as animal-sourced foods. You know, when I was growing up, I always tell this story. You know, we used to sit as a group of boys, you know, boys would sit on their own, girls would sit on their own, about 10, 15 boys sharing one plate of a big starchy meal, which we call sadza in my country, or ugali here in East Africa. And then we would have a plate of vegetables and maybe some meat. And in that scenario, you would see that the elderly, or the older boys actually would get preference. You know, they would be the ones to first take something from the plate, and leaving the young ones to take the scraps. But you know, if you really think of it, the irony is that the young ones are the ones that actually need more of the food, especially the nutritious part of the meal. So this biofortification, it actually an equalizer. I call it an equalizer. Women are normally prejudiced, children are normally prejudiced, but if they can get the nourishment through the starch, which is normally commonly available to everyone, then everyone gets the nourishment that they need. The other thing is that biofortification is actually very cost effective. If it's a matter of an upfront investment to develop the actual variety, to develop the actual crop. But once you've developed the variety, then it can be self-perpetuating, especially with open pollinated varieties. You know, once it's introduced in the community, you need to just introduce once in a while fresh batch of seed to make sure that the nutrient content remains the same, but otherwise it continues to self-perpetuate. And then the other thing that makes us so excited about it, and which we spend the past few years working on, is that it is based on science. We've done quite a lot of studies globally, different crops, just to test the efficacy the effectiveness of these biofortified crops. We just wanted to make sure that they result in positive outcomes. And in a lot of studies, we've shown that it does bring about some positive health outcomes, especially when consumed regularly. And those studies
sorry,
are out
Donald,
there.
if you can conclude now.
Thank you very much, Siba. So just to say that we normally take a value chain approach to make sure that we build in sustainability and make sure that we inculcate the whole system within the communities. And then we've made quite a bit of progress. Up to now, we are now scaling up this effort, and 8.4 million households have now have got access to biofortified crops, and 42 million people are benefiting. The majority, 75% of these beneficiaries being in Africa. So we're now scaling. However, there is lots of work to be done because our goal is to reach 1 billion people by 2030. And especially with this advent of COVID, how can we build forward better? I prefer to say build forward better, because we were not where we were supposed to be even before the COVID outbreak. So let's work together and see how we can make this happen. Thank you very much, Simba. Over to you.
Thank you, Donald. Sorry I had to rush you there at the end, but I think the message is clear. I like that graph where you are showing the progressive growth in the number of people that are utilizing fortified crops, but also the fact that you're focusing on local food systems, so that this COVID has shown us that you can't depend on food coming from miles away or even being imported, because those restrictions actually showed us that you needed to be, to some extent, self-sufficient to a certain level, to that extent. So if you can grow a large amount of what you need, especially through staples, I think that's going the right way. So I'm quite excited about that. And yeah, thank you so much. So we'll move on. And I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions for you later on. But let's move on to the next presentation. And I think it's very much related to what Donald has just finished talking about, the issue of biodiversity, nutrition and health. What role does this play? And how can farmers play a role in this? And Donald was talking about a story, when he was growing up, fairly common in most African households. That was the norm, that you'd share a meal, you eat from one plate. I could tell you lots of stories about, as a young person, what I used to be able to do to outfox the older boys in the family. But the issue of biodiversity basically is what is at the core of what used to be African traditional food systems, where you were not dependent on monocultures. You produced a range of foods, and when you mixed all those, you ended up with a fairly balanced diet. And of course, a loss of that has meant that we probably need to move to biofortification, among other things. But there's still value in moving back and looking at what we used to have as, a rich biodiversity, which we used as our food sources. And now, of course, the world is dependent on a very narrow band of commodities that are forming the major part of our diet. So the question is, can we rewind, or do we wind forward? What is the picture? Justify Sharma is from the SADC Genetic Resources Center based in Lusaka. So who else but a man that looks after the genetics of our region to tell us about agro biodiversity? Justify, please, if you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Simba. And thank you very much, Fanapan, for inviting me to this very important session of your annual program. My name is Justify Shava. I'm with the SADC Plant Genetic Resources Center here in Lusaka, Zambia. And I'm going to take you through a talk about how agrobiodiversity is important for nutrition and food security for farmers, especially focusing on the plant genetic resources, which are at the base of all agricultural programs. Looks like I'm stuck here, failing to move my slides.
Using your keyboard arrows?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do. Looks like okay, it's now happening. All right, so this is a brief outline of what I'm going to be talking about, just telling other colleagues what the SADC Plant Genetic Resources Center is all about, talk about agrobiodiversity and link it to climate change, and give a linkage between crop diversity and food and nutrition security. Then also just try to show how plant genetic resources are also contributing significantly to the modern industrialization that is taking place. I will give you some rundown of partnerships that we are also having in this area. So SPGRC it was created in 1989 as a partnership between SADC member states and the donors who were coming from the Nordic countries. The aim of it was basically to coordinate and promote the conservation and the sustainable utilization of plant genetic resources in this SADC region. So it is basically a shield against genetic erosion, and very important, especially because genetic erosion is coming about as a result of issues of climate change, feeding habits change by the population of Southern Africa, as well as intensive or extensive infrastructure development that is resulting in use of land that was reserved for conservation of plant genetic resources in the past. So it's a network. We have 16 member states, 16 SADC member states as shown there. And these countries are found on the southern tip, if not the southern half of Africa, as shown there. So how we work is that we have a set of national gene banks in member states that do national collection of plant genetic resources from all the communities occurring in the member state. And the collection they have in member states, we call it an active collection. And this active collection is replicated at the regional gene bank in Zambia as a long-term storage collection that we normally call a base collection. But we are also aware that disaster can strike at the regional gene bank. So we duplicate the material we have at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in the Svalbard Archipelago in a small town called Longyearbyen in the North Pole there. So that we are sure that whatever happens, we still have something that will make sure the world keeps going even after a serious disaster strikes. So basically the activities that we do include the generation of material, collection of material, documenting the material, so that we create all the information required by the users of material for the material to be useful to the stakeholders. We ensure that whatever is collected and documented has to be distributed to users. So SPGRC has got basically 3 programs: on-farm conservation, where we work with farmers themselves to ensure that material they have is conserved centrally at some place in the communities. Ex-situ conservation, where material is conserved in gene banks at national level, at regional level, and I've talked of the global level. It's at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, and we ensure thorough documentation of information about plant genetic resources to make them useful in the end. So, but what was the problem when the SPGRC to be formed, or rather when the project to conserve plant genetic resources was mooted? It was mainly because of the realization that plant genetic variation was being threatened. And it was being threatened because of mainly talked about climate change, you are seeing what is happening, new pests and diseases coming in, extreme weather conditions, and all this actually resulted in loss of adaptation of material. Modernization, westernization, I rather call it, where children are no longer even eating the indigenous land races and forcing the parents to actually abandon all the diversity they used to keep in preference of the modern food species, which are found mainly in the supermarkets. This has resulted in extensive loss of diversity. There is also extensive development that is taking place. Move around Lusaka, the fastest growing city in Southern Africa. Lots of capital investments happening there, but we are not sure whether plant genetic resources that was occurring in those areas is being conserved. You talk of wars in many parts of the world. I can give an example of what happened in Syria at the Ikada Gene Bank, how plant genetic resources could have been lost there or were lost there because of these disturbances. So because of these challenges and the realization that there is serious threat to present and future crop improvement, as well as food and nutrition security, the plant genetic resources conservation program was created. And you are all aware that it is generally believed that the ability of an ecosystem to survive climate change-induced shocks is very much dependent on the available genetic diversity in that particular environment. So let's look at how climate change and plant genetic resources can interact. Visible indicators there of climate change, rising temperatures that we are witnessing these days, reduced precipitation. Just the previous season was a drought, extensive one, dams are dry. There is also a case of increased precipitation where we have serious flooding, and all this render all our material unadapted to the conditions. New pests and diseases, you know, tutor, you know, the fall armyworm that is coming, all these were not around, but we think that they are coming because of the changes in the climatic conditions. So the impact of climate change then on living organisms is that there is loss of adaptation. And a very clear example is the fossil forest in Zambia. Those who have passed through the Zambezi Valley around the Chirundu area, you will see that these are not rocks, but they are now rocks, but they are actually a metamorphosis of organic matter as a result of fossilization that took place when the giant coniferous trees that used to grow in the Zambezi Valley could not cope with climate change. So the overall effect of this lack of adaptation usually is famine, as many people are unable to look after the crops which they have because they lack adaptation, resulting in malnutrition, starvation, and where there is no food, there are always disagreements and domestic violence. So basically, variation is what brings about adaptation to organisms. And we say variation simply refers to heritable differences among living organisms. We at the Gene Bank keep variation that is useful for adaptation of plant genetic resources and therefore ensuring food security in the region. So something happening here, which I cannot explain. Hello, looks like there's something that is stopping me from sharing here.
We can still see your screen. Do you see the PowerPoint on your side?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear us? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so we can still see you sharing on our side, on our side. So do you see the PowerPoint? Just click on PowerPoint.
Let me check. Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so start sharing again.
Okay. From current slides. All right, thank you. So I was talking about variation and its importance in making sure that there is adaptation and continued farming in agriculture. So the variation that I'm talking about is resident in agrobiodiversity. especially plant genetic resources in the form of landraces, landrace varieties, which are farmer varieties, crop old relatives, obsolete varieties, which are being grown in the communities but are no longer recognized. Those who come from Southern Africa remember the variety SRR52, how it has been transformed into Gankata in Zambia and other parts of the region. So I have also indicated here how breeders develop varieties just to illustrate that for them to be able to come up with new adapted varieties to the climatic conditions that we are seeing these days, there must be variation. And this variation has to come from the different plant genetic resources that we are keeping. Think of the origin of modern maize, which is said to have come from teosinte, a grass that is found in Southern America. But when you look at the modern maize, you won't believe that is what has happened, introgressive hybridization. So in general, plant genetic resources also have contributed greatly to food and nutrition security in the communities. You also recall that over 60% of Africans cannot afford to buy processed food from supermarkets. So they rely on farmer varieties, which are well adapted to their own conditions. And about 60% again of these farmers are relying on these landraces as sources of seed and not the hybrids or improved varieties because they can't afford them. We can also talk of indigenous vegetables, which are very rich sources of nutrients. These days we're talking of COVID-19, the key nutrient there being zinc, vitamin C, and A to help confer resistance to the virus. Are we not able to get some nutrients from these plant genetic resources which are indigenous to our communities and readily available to even the poorest farmer? I think it's something that we need to look into and screen the material that we are keeping and promote it among our communities. So plant genetic resources is very important again for food security and industrialization. Here, you see them being used in crop improvement for yield increase, animal feed production, used also in factories, plant genetic resources as rich sources of starch, oils, and other proteins. In pharmaceuticals, we are seeing products coming from plant genetic resources, pests and diseases, resistance breeding happening as well. And in the seed business, we are seeing open pollinated varieties also going around. So in brief, in the industry, you can see that in the plant genetic resources also play a role against climate change as we develop new varieties are adapted to changing conditions. Food and nutrition security is also guaranteed when all this happens. So let me also indicate that what we do with other partners, we work with the Global Seed Vault, where we duplicate all the material that is occurring in the region. I'm pleased to mention that we currently have deposited close to 10,000 accessions, which are safely stored there out of the 60,000 that we are holding on in the region. The Crop Trust, they fund quite a number of our activities. The Alliance of Biodiversity, the Darwin Initiative, Food and Agriculture Organization, as well as the International Treaty. So in brief, we can say that agro-biodiversity is very important for food and nutrition security in the world. And this diversity actually acts as a buffer against the negative effects of climate change. The plant genetic resources are even more important now than before, since before we didn't know these serious effects of climate change, which we are witnessing these days. And these plant genetic resources are a source of novel genes that are used for crop improvement and climate change. They are also a direct source of food because they are adapted to the local conditions where the most poor farmers are found. In terms of industrialization, most industrial processes rely on products that have been developed using these diverse plant genetic resources. In brief, that's what I had for you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Justify. I think, yeah, that ties in very well. We moved on from biofortification, and we went back to, you know, kind of like back to the origin. And I like the statement that, you know, variation really is is the key that unlocks agro biodiversity, which is something that I think a lot of us have been forgetting. And unfortunately, the current generations obviously don't have experience of how to utilize these kinds of foods. And we obviously need to do something, especially those who are parents, to make sure that that knowledge is not lost to to future generations. And the value of indigenous varieties is important to make sure we don't lose that knowledge. And yeah, I think one of the statements I see here is that resilience to climate change depends on genetic diversity in the environment. That's a key statement there, because we're talking about building better and resilient food and agriculture systems. It's almost like building better by going back to the future, if you like. So it's that's where we'll find some of the answers there. We also can find answers in biofortification, but we need to unleash all the armor that we have against the adversaries we're facing today: climate change, COVID-19, all these shocks that are coming to destabilize the system. A lot of the solutions are already within the system itself. We just need to look harder and be a bit more innovative about how we approach it. Thank you, Justify. We'll move on in the same theme, the issues of markets, incentivizing markets for nutrition outcomes. And we're going to have Joanna Kane Potaka, who is Communications Director at ICRISAT, who is going to talk to us about how all these things come together. We're talking about nutrition, but there are also issues of conserving the environment. But more importantly, as Tembi said yesterday, there's an issue of economy, which for farmers, they need to make sure that they're incentivized to keep on producing what we need to have on our tables, but that the system has to be resilient in as far as it protects the farmers so that they can continue to do what they know how to do best. So Joanna, if you can take us through your presentation. Thank you very much. I think, I don't know if it's just my side, you sound like you're muted.
We can't seem to hear you. Do you maybe have a mic connected or anything like that? No.
Joanna, if you are looking at
your mic is on the screen at least.
Yeah, look at the bottom. Hi, Joanna. If you are looking at the left-hand side where the microphone icon is, there is a little arrow that's pointing upwards. Can you please click on that? And then just choose the microphone. What selection can you see there?
Yeah, does that help?
There we go.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Okay, so thanks Simba, and thanks to Fanapan for the honour to talk today and the initiative for this stakeholder dialogue. So speaking on incentivizing the markets for nutrition outcomes, and we've heard from Joshua how there has been, because of COVID, a decrease to the access to food, and Simba stressed the hidden hunger that will worsen as a result as well. However, I am not sure I have seen a shift in investments or in policies as a result of this. Now, there's always been some investments in the area of nutrition, but have we seen any extra from donors, from governments, even from consumers? Are they, Joshua stressed how they're looking for cheaper food, which is less nutritious. So we're actually not seeing the shift that's needed for the extra nutrition. So how can we incentivize the markets for these nutritional outcomes? A key message we got from yesterday's dialogue was that any solution needs to be holistic. And this is the same for any nutrition solution. We have to involve all the value chain players. That means involving the consumers, involving the SME and food processors, involving the retailers and sellers, and the farmers and the seed producers. We heard from Harvest Plus about that need for the right varieties of the seeds as well. Plus, it's not just the value chain, plus we have to have the influential players there. Now that's government, but what often we don't realize is that's also the research organizations, the NGOs, the development agencies. Have they shifted their investments to higher nutrition investments? But let's also question, what do we mean? What are we really incentivizing for? Just saying nutritious food or nutrition outcomes is very, very broad. And do we even have agreement on what is nutritious? So what I'm going to do is put 10 points on the table today to add to the dialogue. And these are to stimulate debate. So the first point I want to put on the table today is that if we can diversify staples, that's how we can have the biggest impact on nutrition, assuming we diversify staples with more nutritious foods, because staples are 70% of the plate. So if we're not focused on them, we're only focused on 30% or less of what people eat. And typically those staples are the least nutritious part of the meal. They're often refined, they're often empty carbohydrates, and have minimal micronutrients, minimal fiber, high glycemic index. Now, to achieve diversifying staples, we need to focus on just one or two foods or crops to do this, because to be a staple, you have to have a major value chain. We don't need consumer behavior change, but it's a way to have a major impact on nutrition. A second point I'd like to add on the table today is we need to set up systems that are variety conscious. Now, what I mean by that is we need to select by variety, and Harvest Plus has pushed this hard today. We need those high nutrient varieties, and we need the whole food system to be developed on that. And a really good example, if you're looking at millets or sorghum, you can double the iron and zinc level just by the variety you choose. So irrespective of the soil nutrition, everything else, just by choosing the right variety will double the nutrition, and that's huge. So the next point is a point which we rarely hear discussed in our circles, and we need to elevate it in the discussion, and that is whole grain. We cannot continue with refined grains. Now, we do rarely hear this, and we've got to start to discuss it. And to bring in whole grains, it's still a whole value chain approach that's needed. Even back to the breeders, we need to breed the varieties where whole grain still will have the shelf life needed, the cooking abilities, etc. But then we also need the consumer behavior. We need the processors to be able to deal with it, etc. But it won't happen until we start recognizing the need and bringing this as part of the dialogue. Now, the next point to bring on the table is related to that, and that is how we process and cook the food. All the hard work at the agricultural end is lost if we then lose the nutrition in the processing and the cooking. So how are we bringing that in the discussion? Now, the next idea is something which isn't talked about enough as well, and that's food combinations. Now, no individual food is going to provide all the nutritional needs. So how we combine the food not only means we've got a more nutritious basket and diet, it also affects the bioavailability. So for example, you need vitamin C to absorb the iron. So we have to start the discussion on food combinations as well. An example is we recently released a protein study. Now, many people, although not many consumers, know that legumes are not a complete protein. They're low in one of the essential amino acids. However, millets have 50% more of that essential amino acid. So when you combine those two foods together, the millets and the legumes, you get a complete quality protein, a highly digestible protein, plus the added advantage of a nutri-basket of all the micronutrients that the millet brings as well. So that's a very powerful food combination. Okay, the next item to bring to the table and bring into the debate, we need a level playing field for nutritious foods and incentives for nutritious foods. Now, in a place like India, a level playing field would mean the same government support, the minimum support prices, the subsidies, etc. In Africa, I think one of the things that a level playing field would mean could be around the research investments. Now, are we putting as much research investment in nutritious foods and crops as we are in others? And where are the incentives to put more in those foods? Okay, the next point is about, so this is a fast track, a whole series of points to just bring to the table. So the next point, actually, so far I've been talking about nutrition solutions. I actually don't believe in creating nutrition solutions. That is working in a silo. Yesterday we heard about climate change nutrition, climate change solutions. Today we're talking about nutrition solutions. We have to bring this together. We can't be working in silos. Now, we created what we called a smart food triple bottom line. Just like socially conscious companies have a triple bottom line, we need to bring a triple bottom line into the food system. So a smart food triple bottom line is about every solution looking at, is it good for you? So the nutrition, is it good for the planet? So is it environmentally sustainable? And is it good for the farmer? The resilience and the viability. So every solution needs to look at that smart food triple bottom line. Okay. Now, for the next couple of points, I'll tell a story to get these points across. So we were working with Africa Harvest in eastern Kenya, and what we found is it's a drier zone. It traditionally was a sorghum and millet growing area. But what happened during difficult economic times, the government gave maize as a free food aid. People got used to eating maize. They liked it. They started growing it. But it wasn't suitable for that agroecology. So then the maize was surviving 1 in 4 years, which meant 3 and 4 years, those farming families did not have a crop and they did not have food. Yet they kept planting maize. Now, when you look deeper into that, the reason is the value chain is well established. People come to the farm gate and sell the seed. People will come to the farm gate and buy the grain. They know they can sell it. They pretty much know what price they'll get. If they'd gone back to sorghum and millet, which was more suitable for that agroecology and more nutritious, they'd have to find the seed. They'd then have to take their grain to market. They don't know if they'll sell it. They don't know what price they get. Plus, 2 generations had gone past. They'd forgotten how to cook it. The taste, they weren't used to the taste. So to come in with a solution, we had to come in with a whole value chain solution, from seed system development through to growing the crop, through to how to cook it, knowing that you could cook the same ugali, whether you use maize or sorghum, or better still, a combination, so you've got a diversity. And then we worked with the women's groups to start up agri-businesses, making bakery products from the grain. But it's a whole of value chain solution. Another example was with Catholic Relief Services in West Africa, were providing a school midday meal. They wanted to use pearl millet because it's highly nutritious and it's grown locally. However, when they served the meal, they had a negative response from the children as well as the parents. And everyone wanted rice because rice had become the trendy food in the urban areas, and that's what they wanted. And Catholic Relief Services didn't want the one meal a day they provided to be the least nutritious meal. So they were difficult. And this is about, we've got to work with consumers. We've got to make food tasty. We've got to change the image of food. And a really good example of how the image impacts, Nestle in West Africa decided their Cerelac product that they provide, the baby weaning food, that instead of using wheat, which is an imported product in West Africa and very expensive, that they would use pearl millet because it's high in iron and zinc and it's locally available. But again, they had a negative reaction from the consumers. The consumers thinking the imported wheat was superior. Now, I'm sure the babies didn't know any difference. So there's a lot to work with. And so when we often say from farm to fork, we actually sometimes need to say from fork to farm. We've got to work at the consumer end sometimes first and create that demand. So changing consumer behavior has to be on the table in the agenda as well. And it is possible. And I'll give an example of where we showed the possibility. So we did a program in Tanzania with 2,000 school children. So we went to 4 schools, they were boarding schools, and we worked with the school chefs on how to include pigeon pea and finger millet into the school meals. Now, part of this was letting the chefs experiment to design the meals and make sure they're tasty. And then we also ran a awareness program with the students. We went back 18 months later, which was January this year. So 70%, 70% of the students had changed their negative perception about pigeon pea. And 80% of the students had changed their negative perception about finger millet. And greater than 95% of the students wanted to continue with these foods in their school meals. There was a radical turnaround. Now, what we found after 18 months was pigeon pea continued in the school meals, but finger millet didn't. And the reason was it wasn't locally accessible and it wasn't grown locally. So it was harder to get. And that also is another point that we've got to put on the table, which is about local food system solutions. And our last speaker.
If you can wrap up now.
Finished? Okay, sure. Okay, so one of the last points then is even though most of us here today are concerned with the smallholder farmer and the rural communities, and we heard today how the rural communities had, it said 35.8% poverty, much higher than urban areas. We have to step back and look at the whole system more. And part of that is driving urban market demand as well. And so okay, so in summary then, I won't go to my summary slides or my summary video. I'll just finish there. They were just some different points that I don't think are always on the agenda and need to be part of the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Appreciate it. If maybe later when we get into question time, if you keep those slides close by and the video, okay, we might have a chance to play them, also to answer some of the questions. But I like the fact that you kind of like dovetailing into the biofortification and agro-diversity presentations, and is telling a story. There's a common thread running through there. And as you said, it's not about working in silos. It's just that as technical people, we tend to like these boxes because it makes analysis easier, but the world doesn't work like that. The world is basically seamless. You find the one problem is triggered in one area and it causes all sorts of things. Good example, COVID-19. a health issue, and look what's happening to our food systems, to economies, and to everything. So there are interlinkages. So we need always to be awake to that. But I like that triple bottom line, good for you, that means nutritious, good for the planet. So we're talking about resilience and looking after the environment, and good for the farmer, because if the farmer is not happy, then of course he will refuse to play the game. And so the system will crash. So all those three legs, it's like a three-legged pot. It has to sit stably on all those legs and make sure that the system functions. So thanks very much, Joanna. I know that there's so many examples you could have given us. And yeah, I'm hoping that we'll have time to come back to those summary slides and the video, which I so much look forward to. I hope we can save some time. So let's move on. Thanks, Joanna. We move on to, yes, the issue of data. I think it was Josh who said, look, we need to constantly monitor what's happening in terms of nutrition, food security, so that we can deploy the right solutions, especially government, in terms of policies. But one of the challenges that's there is with COVID-19, which restricts movement. So you are not able to use traditional ways of gathering data from the field. You can't send enumerators to the field to collect that information. So what do you do under those circumstances? But even without COVID, there's certain times in certain communities who are not accessible, who usually get left out in terms of data collection. So we don't know enough about those communities to be able to deploy responses timeously. So yeah, I've got my colleague here, Nathaniel Jensen, who is an economist at ILRI, a partner of FANAPAN. We are jointly working on a digital solution to monitor community health and nutrition status. So this is ongoing work, but he's sharing it just to show you what possibilities there may be. This started well before COVID-19, but I think the solutions would be applicable in many situations. So Nathan, if you can go ahead, please.
Hi, Simba. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Excellent. Greetings, everyone, and thank you, Simba and FANAPAN, for the opportunity to present. As Simba said, my name is Nathan Jensen, and I'm an economist at the International Livestock Research Institute. And this is a project that we're working with FANAPAN, and that's been funded by IDRC. The challenge that we faced is the same one that Joshua summarized earlier and Simba summarized as well, and that's a need for greater health and nutrition data. The way we see it, these data, the reason there's such a paucity of these data is because the conventional methods used to collect them are slow and expensive. And so the result is that there's insufficient data for many of the needs that we have. So I think there's many of us before that have looked into health and nutrition data to look at like the impacts of droughts or to monitor the impact of COVID, for example, and we find that the data is severely lacking. This comes up often in the global nutrition reports, for example. One issue of this correlation between expense and available data is that the data is sort of especially sparse in some regions. In the areas that I work, mostly in our pastoral areas, we find that nutrition and health data are very sparse in those areas, as well as it's not always so accurate. So I list some papers down here. There's many papers, but these are some recent papers that have been talking about sort of these data issues that we face. One important one to mention is this by Hannah Wild in 2019. Her and colleagues looked at the DHS data, and they suspected that the sampling that was done by the DHS data wasn't especially accurate for pastoral communities that move around. And so they used satellites to identify BOMAs and then did a spatially sampling basically from physical households. And they find that the implications at the community and regional level are very different if you use the DHS data versus what they looked at. And it was really an issue of sampling in that case, which is not surprising for those of us that work in pastoral areas because these households move around a lot. But it is very important. It shows us that even the data that are there maybe aren't well situated for these remote areas. Of course, in conflict and emergency settings where data is very, very important, we have very little of it often. And here we are in a pandemic, and we know that it's challenging. This Griffith et al. Paper also mentions what Simba had just mentioned as well, is not only do we especially need data during something like a disruption like a pandemic, but the pandemic especially creates a situation where going to collect that data could put your respondents at risk. And so there were restrictions around travel that stopped us from going into the field to collect data. But even if those restrictions wouldn't have been there, of course, we wouldn't have liked the idea of sending enumerators from the city where infection rates are higher out to these remote communities. So our proposed solution was to develop a digital platform by which caregivers could record, collect, and submit data directly to a server that we could monitor. This allows us to have real-time data, but it also sort of eliminates the need for having enumerators that you've trained, that you travel out there with, that sort of have to schedule time with the caregiver. Instead, she can just collect this data whenever she has the time, when she feels like it, or sort of, if there's data about consumption, she can collect it right after they eat, for example. We suspect that this will reduce the cost of every data point quite dramatically so that we can start collecting high frequency data as we would prefer, as well as get out into these remote areas where data is currently missing. There's a second sort of side to this, and that's that once we have these tools in people's hands, then we can sort of do some calculations within the tool itself. In this case, what we'll do is we'll take the data that people are submitting and we'll track it over time and return that data to the user and compare it to international benchmarks. So benchmarks against sort of growth charts from UAC, household dietary diversity, and we can provide some messaging to the user there. These are some of our participants in Samburu County learning how to use this. Let me talk about the tool and then I'll come back to talking about the pilot. So our target was caregivers and the children that they care for. The tool doesn't require literacy or numeracy, and it actually doesn't require an internet connection, which isn't listed here. We focus on dynamics of individuals over time. So it's longitudinal repeat observations of these specific individuals. As an indicator of malnutrition, we collect MUAC. Of course, we would like weight and height, but this is a little challenging to put the tools, the mechanical tools in people's hands for collecting that. But then we do focus on these immediate causes of malnutrition, disease, and consumption. On the top right, or on the right, you can see screenshots of the tools that we developed. So the top left is the landing page, and the caregiver can easily select whichever task she'd like to do. If she's going to respond about her child, she would tick the child. Down below is this graph is where she would tick if she wanted to, or she would select if she wanted to hear about sort of her progress against those benchmarks. On the right, there is an example of responding about the food consumption of your child in the last 24 hours. Of course, there was some training here, so we don't expect that caregivers would understand how to go through this tool right away. So we did a couple days of training and iterating with them about sort of the icons to use and the messaging to use. And then down below are sort of these messaging features. And so you can see there's a message here about looking at the trend and the level of current MUAC. The little green button, if you were to press that, you would hear a message that would be in the local language, an audio file would play that says effectively what's written there in English on the slide. So this is saying, your MUAC of your child has been increasing. These are the self-reported MUACs, and the level is good. On the right, the bottom right is a caregiver whose child wasn't meeting some of these benchmarks. All this messaging was developed with the caregivers because, of course, we're very sensitive to the fact that a lack of dietary diversity can be for many reasons, and one of them could be constraints around available food. So we don't want to make people feel bad by scolding them. It's more of a reminder. The pilot, we had about 200 caregivers in a pastoral region of northern Kenya in Samburu County. Caregivers can respond sort of as much or as little as they like. At the same time, we had community health volunteers going around, and every month they would collect the same data from the same caregivers, with the idea being that we could use the CHV data as benchmark data to understand the quality of the caregiver data. In this pilot period, really our objectives are to learn about the quality, learn about participation rates, if there's things we can do to improve either of those things. We did facilitate much of this, so we provide with phones and data bundles. And we actually pay the caregivers a little token for each of their submissions, about 20 cents. So participation rates have been high. It's almost been 12 months now. So we're collecting this data. The figure on the top right, it shows the months, the project months. And then the circle are the means for each day, sorry, each week, but it's showing the mean submissions per participant per week. So you can see November, early December is when the project was launching, as we rolled in more communities. And then we have consistently high participation rates, even when we had sort of fieldwork lockdown in April. We did a remote update of the tool. We did this by sending video links out to the CHBs who then called up caretakers and they sort of did the update. And then as fieldwork has sort of slowly started coming online, we see that there wasn't a large disruption to participation rates, which was fabulous for us. There's a blog if you're more interested about this remote update in the time of COVID, if you will. So we have a couple preliminary findings. As I said, the project's ongoing, so we've just been waiting for it to end before we really start digging into the data. But I can speak to sort of the two objectives that we talked about. So the first objective is around data quality. So the top right figure is showing the caregiver measured MUAC of their child in green. And then the same child, the CHV measured MUAC is in orange. And as you move across the x-axis, this is sort of month by month. So I'm showing monthly means here. And we see that the dynamics are quite similar, but the caregivers seem to consistently report MUAC scores that are a little bit higher, about 1/3 of a centimeter higher than the CHVs. So if that's consistent, that's really easy to control for statistically. If the difference varies over time dramatically, then we're going to have a problem. But right now, this looks very promising. Down below, then we're going to look at something different. The second objective is to learn about if this messaging can impact behavior of the caregivers. So before I mentioned that we did a remote update in June, and that update actually added a feature the caregivers had, before we had provided this messaging about the children, and the caregivers had requested that we add a feature to provide messaging about their own. So for the adults, minimum dietary diversity. And so we added this feature in June. What we're looking at is sort of a change to reported dietary diversity because of that. And this is what we find. These figures is a little different than the top figure. It's months across the x-axis, minimum dietary diversity for women on the y-axis. And then we separated the participants into two groups by sort of their initial reading. So we thought there might be a group that was initially had low scores, they might change their behavior more than a group that initially had higher scores. So the higher scored women are in green and the lower are in orange. And those are a consistent group all the way through. And we see that both groups increased. And what was really promising was that the increase was in food groups that we were providing messaging around. So we specifically talked about meat, green leafy vegetables, or orange fleshed fruit and vegetables. And we saw an increase in those second two. So it's promising. To summarize, there's a great need for data in these pastoral regions and many other remote regions of the world. And this becomes more acute during things like COVID or other market disruptions or health disruptions. We know that digital platforms, from many examples in the world, we know that digital platforms can facilitate data collection and dissemination in these regions. But what we were really excited about was that it was resilient to sort of this COVID disruption. And it was flexible in the way that we were able to update it remotely. So we could have also updated the tool to create messaging around hand washing, around visiting your CHB if you start facing these different types of symptoms. We just didn't have, so it wasn't really part of the scope of the work. But we hope to in the future have some more dynamic recommendations. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Just that's kind of like a foretaste of the future, as it were, using digital technologies to track nutrition and health indicators. I think if and when it gets practically launched and we can take care of all the logistics, that would probably be a disruptor, if you like, because if you look at the regular sort of data collection activities, DHS and a few others, they're quite expensive to lay out. And of course, one of the challenges is that they are episodic. So you miss out on things that are of a short-term nature, like what happened with this COVID pandemic. We're talking of the difficulties of collecting data. You can't rely on the past data sort of profiles because this is a completely new situation. So you need something that is pretty close to near real time that you can use to track what is happening in the communities. So thanks so much, Nathan, for that. And yeah, so it's the issue of data, tracking food and nutrition indicators. So let's move on. Our last presentation is going to be from Opa Marawanyika, who is with Care International, one of our partners. And she's talking about Hair Harvest, Our Future, a nutritional lens. So we're looking at the gender dimension here of food and nutrition security and how, yeah, obviously it says hair harvest. So obviously we're looking at this probably from the women's point of view as producers of food, but also as those that prepare food and basically look after the family's nutrition. Opa, over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. You just need to change over to the full screen slide show mode. Yes, if you can click that, I think we are good to go.
Yes.
Yeah, we are on.
Thank you so much, Chair, for the time. My name is Opa Marawanyika. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor for Gender, Food Security and Resilience with Care USA. I'm based in Malawi, but I'm currently connecting from Zimbabwe, actually from home. My presentation today is going to focus on the gendered impact of COVID-19, specifically focusing on food and nutrition security. I know the chair has referred to Hair Harvest Our Future. I'll refer to it, but today I really want to zero in on the gendered aspects to COVID-19, which we are currently battling with at the moment, and the work that we have been doing as Care in the region. So I want to start off by really speaking to the She Feeds the World framework. I know, Simba, you have talked about focusing on women there, where we are talking about the global framework for care, She Feeds the World, that really focuses on food and nutrition security. And our main focus are women smallholder farmers. If you look at the framework that we have in the bubbles inside, we are focusing on the different change areas that would really promote food and nutrition security at household level, at community level, and in the society. And those bubbles are really looking at the different thematic areas that we focus on as care. And at the center of those, we have got women's empowerment, we believe, and with evidence that there is need to really focus on women empowerment if we are to achieve food and nutrition security at household level and at community level, knowing full well that the majority of our producers are women, and hence the need for us to be really intentional in understanding the different needs of women smallholder farmers. You see that we have got important change agents, inclusive markets, issues to do with nutrition that we are talking about today, both nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific interventions, promoting social protection and ensuring that there's access to productive resources for our women smallholder farmers and their families, access to land, access to inputs, access to information, all that. So you see, looking at our She Feeds the World framework, it's comprehensive, and it really shows the integrative nature of the work that we do for food and nutrition security, the connections that are there that we need to holistically address these issues around markets, around nutrition, around ag production, around resources, social protection, in cases of emergencies, all those putting the women at the center. And we do have very important approaches overall that really influence and push the work that we do, inclusive of gender equality and women's voice, inclusive governance and resilience approaches. So in brief, this is the global framework that we have as CARE, which we use to guide our work in food nutrition security in different countries globally. Coming specifically to the region in Southern Africa, we do have the Southern Africa Impact Growth Strategy, which we call here Harvest Our Future. And in this case, this is being implemented in 6 Southern African countries, Madagascar, Mozambique, Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And again, we are talking of, we are focusing on our women smallholder farmers as critical change agents for us to be able to achieve food and nutrition security at household level. So you see that image there, and for me, it's an image of hope rather. If we look at African women, the work that we are doing, we really want to ensure that they are resilient, they are able to adapt to climate change, they really operate in a space where there is gender equity and equality, where they're able to feed their children, their families, and contribute to development both at household and at community level. So this is what we have in Southern Africa, a specific strategy that really zeroes in on the specific needs for the region. And in this case, the strategy also focuses on climate resilient agriculture, issues to do with nutrition that we are talking about and pushing for, both nutrition sensitive, specific interventions, financial inclusion. We know with CARE, we have the popular village savings and lending associations, making sure that really women smallholder farmers, they're at the forefront and leaders in ensuring that they have access to financial control and have control on financial issues. And also the gender equality and women's voice. Me being a gender advisor, this is an area of interest for us where we really want to make sure that we address the gender issues each time we talk about food and nutrition security. So today, like I have said, in as much as we do have those global frameworks that we have and also the regional framework that I've talked about, we want to specifically talk about gender and COVID-19. And one thing I want to highlight at this point in time is CARE has done so far 90 rapid gender assessments in the different countries that we are working in to kind of understand what are the gender issues pertaining to COVID-19. We know this is the challenge that we have, and it really has some gendered impacts to it, and it impacts on food and nutrition security at household level in different ways. So we're pretty sure that the effects of COVID-19 pandemic are exposing the existing flaws in food systems, many of which they actually stem out of the gender inequalities that are prevalent. Women and girls are the majority of the food producers and food providers for their households, for their communities, but their contributions are not actually frequently unseen. So the rapid gender assessments and the different studies that CARE has conducted so far, and we are reviewing and updating the rapid gender assessments to try and really understand what are the gender implications, what are the gender issues that are really affecting food and nutrition security at household level. We also have recently published a policy analysis, left out and left behind policy report that really speaks to these gender issues as it relates to COVID-19. So, and one thing I also want to highlight is, in as much as we do have these gender challenges, it's also important to note that women are also a core part of the solution. They're at the forefront, they are leaders, they are innovators, they are farmers, they are caretakers. And as a result, they should be at the center stage of solving the challenges that we are facing. So I just picked on a few issues drawing from the different rapid gender assessments that have been conducted in the different countries, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in most of our country offices in the region. We have got information, data, evidence really around the gendered impacts of COVID-19 on food and nutrition security. And I'll highlight this, that due to COVID-19 restrictions, especially on mobility restrictions, this has led to loss of income. I know some colleagues have already highlighted this, and people, especially women, are therefore struggling to access food, and more so diverse foods. I know we have been talking about a balanced plate, diverse food, nutritious food, and from our own information from the rapid gender assessments, we've actually noted that COVID-19 restrictions, especially mobility restrictions and loss of work and income, has really impacted, especially on women who have the responsibility of ensuring that the family and the children do have access to food. And the other thing is around really the pregnant and lactating women. We are working on our nutrition programs. We do work with pregnant and lactating women, women of reproductive age. They actually have specific nutritional needs, and these ones are actually going unmet during this period of COVID-19. And we do have cases of limited dietary diversity and low minimum meal frequency. The aspect of school closures has also affected millions of children to access food through the food feeding programs that we also lead SK. So basically COVID-19 has impacted in this way, especially for women and for girls, pregnant and lactating women, women of reproductive age, not being able to really get the nutritious foods that they require. And I know some of my colleagues here have already highlighted the issues of social norms that we have also identified through the rapid gender assessments. When it comes to household food distribution, you will see that women will prioritize men when it comes to distributing food at household level. They tend to prioritize men with more nutritious foods, and they eat last, or at times they even eat less. So some of these social norms are really coming to fore and being highlighted during this time of COVID-19, where at times we have limited food at household level. Increased care burden for women during this time, such as household chores, women having more responsibilities. We know in the region, like here in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, schools have closed for quite a while, and this has increased the burden of care. For most women, they've been reporting increased work, demand of work, because the schools have been closed for a while. And as a result, it also has some repercussions, especially when we are interacting with our women in care groups, where they talk about the need affecting time for breastfeeding, time to provide complementary feeding to their children because of the increased labor burden at household level. COVID-19 also has increased the demand for water. Based on our interactions in the field and with community women, we know we are promoting hand washing, increased hand washing, using soap, but at the same time, women have challenges to access water in the different communities. And as a result, really, there's been notice of increased care burden for women at household level. Closing of markets, I know colleagues have already talked about it, that markets have really been not working up to standard as a result of COVID-19. There have been some closures, disrupting livelihoods due to the closure of the informal sector and markets. And we know that most of our women, for example, in Zimbabwe, 65% of these women are involved in the informal sector, and hence it really directly impacts on the women smallholder farmer when it comes to accessing markets to sell their produce, to be able to to get some inputs and all that. Reduced access to information is one thing that we have also noted through our different studies, specifically when we know that most of the smallholder farmers really interact mainly through face-to-face meetings at community level. And as a result, the COVID-19 with restrictions, with measures around social distancing, it has really affected, you know, person-to-person meetings. And as a result, this has affected access to information for women. We know we've got the producer marketing groups where women participate in at community level, the farmer groups, the care groups for nutrition, and also the village savings and lending groups that we have at community level, where they would really come together and interact through face-to-face meetings. But because of COVID-19, this really has been affected, and as a result, they were not able to get some information. But all the same, we see that there are some adaptations taking on in our different programs, the aspect of e-extension services, getting information through the different online platforms, WhatsApp platforms that are being used in the different communities. So we acknowledge that programs are really adapting to the changing environment, though there have been some disruptions which have really affected the implementation of our food and nutrition security program.
Okay, if you can conclude now, Opa.
Yes. So in terms of summary and recommendations, I just want to pick maybe 2 or 3. The need for government to really scale up and support gender responsive safety net programs. We know there are different safety net programs that are currently taking place in the region being supported by CARE, but there is need also to really apply a gender analysis. How best do we respond to such issues, understanding the different needs of men and women, boys and girls, and how do we support nutrition through the safety nets, programs that are currently taking place. Work with women's farmer marketing groups to understand their needs. I've talked about that. And also the need to ensure that we support women in leadership. They should be able to sit on all decision-making tables. We know as a result of COVID-19, a lot of structures have been put in place, and hence the need to also prioritize women sitting and really voicing and airing their opinions on these different platforms. The aspect of transforming social norms and barriers, my colleagues have already mentioned it, that at times some of the social and cultural norms need to be addressed. Food distribution at household level, what does it look like? What are the social norms that influence such kind of activities? So there is need to really look at things from a gender perspective, from a gender dimension, understanding the different social norms, the different structures, how can we influence them? How can we support gender transformation in the food systems? So there is need, therefore, to influence at different levels. At household level, well, it's important, at community level, but also at different levels, even with the laws and policies, how best can they support gender equity in the food systems? In summary, thank you very much for the time. Over.
Thank you, Opa. Obviously very passionate about this subject. It comes through very strongly. We thank you for that. And it's always an issue that it's a pity that it came at the end, because it sort of endorses some stereotypes that I know, having worked in development for a while, gender always came as an afterthought. And I hope in future we'll change even the programming, have you right at the top there of the agenda.
Thank you.
Apologies for that oversight. Yeah, very, very interesting points there that you are bringing on. I think the issue you brought on, one of them, that women are not involved in decision making when it comes to COVID matters. It's a challenge, just as much as they are not involved in a lot of other decisions that affect them. So you would say this is nothing new, but obviously, as we said, COVID-19, we're pressing the pause button, and really gives us an opportunity to look back and say, is this the way we should be doing things? So yes, thank you. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you there to ask practically how things have been going, but I'm happy that you showed some practical examples of the work that you've been doing. And for me, and this has been running through, I think from yesterday, the fact that COVID-19 has really exposed existing flaws. It has not really created the new problems per se. What it has done is to take the veil off, and we can't hide anymore in double speak and in all sorts of different kinds of language to pepper the situation. So it's either you see it or you don't. And COVID-19 has really brought everything into the open. The weaknesses of our food systems, the inequalities, and the fact that we have serious poverty that's affecting large, population groups, including, of course, women who are at the center of, if you like, our food system. So we have about 20 minutes or so of discussion. Just to say thank you to all the speakers, this afternoon. I'll try and pick up some of the questions that have come up on the chat, and we'll see if we can dispense with those. Then we can turn over to open, to the floor and take some fresh ones. Some very early question that came up was, how can we make sure that we create a system where cereals are packaged in a way that they provide a substantial amount of nutrients, not just calories? And I think that question came up after Joshua's presentation. So it sounds to me like probably a general question, although Joshua can have a first crack. Let me pick up a few more, then we can take these questions. A comment here from TM, I think this point was hammered home several times, that we need to see a food system that is good for the consumer, the producer, that is the farmer, and the planet. And that would close the disconnect between climate solutions and nutrition solutions. That's a comment also that Joanna made, that we should not really be talking about climate smart agriculture, climate change, and then nutrition separately. These things are so connected. So we need always in our mind to remember that we're dealing with a system. So I don't know whether there'll be a need to respond to that, but that's a comment for noting. The other question, how can we ensure that consumers have information to make nutrition decisions like food combination, food processing, and cooking? We must find effective communication methods targeted to not just smallholder farmers, but to consumers as well. Yeah, great insights, Joanna. So again, an observation. I'm not sure if it needs a re-emphasis. And also, the other questions were basically from Joanna, which was part of a presentation. How can we incentivize the markets for nutrition outcomes? And what exactly are we incentivizing for? So when we talk about incentivizing markets. So I'm not sure, that's some comments, questions, maybe one question, some are comments. I don't know if any of the presenters want to respond to any of that. Maybe starting with Josh, do you want to say a few things? Just maybe short interventions, then we can invite other panelists to come on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siba, and for those interesting presentation. And I think they have captured various issues that I had outlined based on the program. But I would really want to respond to one or two questions. One by Gian Nicole. He asked, the question was, where do I see the role of counties or districts or those low level units and communities in dealing with the COVID-19 as outlined? This is a very relevant question, but I think I like what Opa has outlined down there to look at the families, the gender, the vulnerable communities in the society, how they are affected. But then I think the family is the very best place to target either food security or nutrition. In Kenya, when COVID came in, we had programs of intervention where money was sent directly to the families, identified from the population census of 2019 as living below poverty line. And this is to ensure that they were able to be cautioned or to be able to be given something to take. It was like $20 per week that was being given through mobile phones by the government. But more so in terms of now the recovery, and I think this is what we should be focusing on. How do we find, as we recover the national level, how do we find the lower levels recovery? KIPRA is doing or preparing a socioeconomic recovery for all the 47 units. We call them counties. This is in collaboration with the Council of Governors who administer each of those counties. And then they are looking at all sectors, and the agriculture sector being one of them. And they are trying to find where do they target, what do they do, where do they put the money to ensure that those sectors recover. So that is an ongoing thing that KIPRA is doing together with the Ministry of Planning. They also trying to develop a national socio-economic recovery strategy. But the second thing also, and this one actually is the thing that ran through yesterday, data challenges. Data challenges need to be addressed. I see even on issues to do with digital solutions. The data is very key in doing that. This is the program I mentioned in Kenya, for example, National Information Platform for Nutrition. And the way it is trying to build the capacity of nutritionists or those people who deal with nutrition to be able to monitor, collect, aggregate data so that they can be analyzed. But also they are able to track indicators on household at the household level, and this information is very necessary for informing policy that targeting the programs and the projects to do with the nutrition in the country.
Okay, let me interrupt there so that we can give other panelists a chance also to come through. Thanks. Thank you, Josh. Does anybody else among the panelists want to comment on the issues that were raised?
I'd be happy to, Simba.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so there were quite a few comments on nutrition. So Alice had asked about how to make sure consumers get the information. Well, I'd say what you have to first of all do is find out how they receive their information. What sources do they use and what sources do they trust? And we need a new dimension added to that now. And how has that changed because of COVID? Because there isn't the same level of socialization. And so schools are very important. And I saw Albert or someone just put in a comment about schools don't have good nutrition programs. How can we strengthen that? Health workers often know about health and less about the food angle part to that, so we can collaborate more with them. Social media, TV, and I think an area that is often forgotten are SMEs, so small entrepreneurs are often the pioneers, really bringing up new products and changing markets and interests. And so how can we engage and arm them more with information? Now, a question came about in calories. How can we move from just counting calories? One of the key ways for this comes with data. So if we're not measuring it, we're not going to be acting on it. So how do we ensure our data is not just counting calories? So the data the government uses, the data the research organizations use, etc. And one question was, what are we incentivizing for? So I would say we've got to look at individual areas of what are their particular needs and gaps for nutrition. And there are some typical ones that will usually always come out strongly, but we still have to customize for the area. So we know that zinc, iron, and vitamin A are the 3 biggest micronutrient deficiencies globally. We know protein is the core of any malnutrition, but we've got to look locally. And very last point, Vanani wrote a comment about we've got to be sensitive to culture when we're talking food. And I would say absolutely. So any approaches, make sure they're a participatory approach with the local people involved and developing the solutions. Thanks, Simba.
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, I was going to pose that question from Bonani. I don't know if the other panelists saw it. Bonani said food is more than just nutrition. It is many things, including culture, and that whatever interventions we propose need to be sensitive to these two. So the issue of culture, I know that we're looking at culture in a negative way to say, well, a lot of the culture affects intra-household food allocation. But yeah, I mean, people use food as a means of celebrating. There are all sorts of things that go into that. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, especially when you are looking at the issue of agro biodiversity, the uses that we put some of these traditional grains to. I'm thinking of the local brew and all sorts of other things, which of course the popular grains are probably not suitable for. I mean, maize, rice, and that sort of thing. Does anybody want to comment on the cultural side? I've just picked on one, but there could be other cultural aspects to food that maybe we need to keep in mind as we talk about food and nutrition security.
Can I comment?
Yes, please, Donald.
Thank you very much, Simba. Thank you, everyone. Just want to comment in the context of nutritious staples. At Harvest Plus, we earlier on realized that food is culture, and we needed to introduce, or if when we are substituting biofortified crops for the non-biofortified components, we needed to take this into context. So we have done 1 or 2 things to make sure that we remain culturally relevant. And one thing, the first thing being that the crops that we substitute it's like for like. For instance, pearl millet is going to be substituted by high iron pearl millet, ordinary pearl millet for high iron pearl millet. It's just that the pearl millet will be high in iron and high in zinc. But looking at it with a naked eye, you wouldn't notice the difference. The other thing that we also did was to engage communities and then do some cooking demonstrations, and in some cases kind of introduce new ways of preparing the different dishes that communities would be used to, but also making sure that they are able to retain the nutrition that is inherent in those foods, because bioavailability is a key component of micronutrient uptake. Thank you very much, Simba.
Thank you very much, Donald. So you're talking about the issues of utilization, which of course it's one thing to introduce a food commodity, but it's another to make sure that the consumers know how to utilize it for maximum nutrient availability, whether we're talking bioavailability or even just the preparation, so that it's an attractive meal. But just to raise another question related to what Joanna asked about, what are we incentivizing for? One of the things we're asking for, especially with agrobiodiversity, is this issue of a diverse production base, to say farmers must produce as diverse food as possible, moving away from monocultures. But the question is, are the consumers prepared to pay for it? Even governments, are they prepared to support farmers so that we can popularize these nutritious but otherwise poorly marketed commodities? I mean, farmers are not going, if it's not good for the farmer, how can farmers grow something which we say is good, but then we find that there are challenges with marketing that, so they don't make money out of it? Why would they continue to produce it? So are there any thoughts on how we can promote agrobiodiversity, especially in the production base, to make sure that farmers produce the right kind of foods that have the nutrients that we're looking for to balance our diets? Does anybody want to take on that question? It's the question of incentives and developing markets for new foods or even the old foods. No takers.
Okay, go ahead, Diana.
Go, Donald.
Okay, I was just, again, I'll speak in the context of biofortified crops. I mean, in some cases, biofortified crops are not substituting like for likes. In some cases, there is a change in color, there is a change in characteristics, right? So we have been able at Harvest Plus to help in the development of new products. That's number one. Number two, engage different value chain actors, such as especially the SMEs. I think Joanna, I do agree with Joanna. SMEs were the right conduit in introducing these new kind of novel foods that have been developed, and really kind of activate that pool and that consumption and that uptake. So I think it's a matter of intervening at the right part of the value chain and giving the partners that you work with technical support and even resources, just to kind of create a spark that will lead to that consumer acceptance, consumer uptake. Thank you. Over to you, Simba.
Thanks, Donald. Joanna, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I will, because it's an important point, and it's what we often don't spend enough time at the consumer end. And often this is about influencing the image of those foods. It's not just telling people about it, it's the old-fashioned image they often have. It's also about making it easy for consumers. You know, how do they cook it? How do they prepare it? How is it as simple as possible? It's also about the product development and about driving it sometimes from the urban markets, who are often the trendsetters to influence this and create the demand pull for the farmer. And I'll just add one interesting example. This is a study that Africa Harvest did, and they had two studies. They had one where the farmers were given the same sort of agro sort of extension help. And then they had another group where they were given agro extension help, but at the same time, they were given information about the nutrition and about the actual food side of it. Now, what they found is the farmers in the second group had much bigger uptake of the agro technologies because they were given the bigger picture about the nutrition and the excitement of these foods. And it meant more. So, you know, so we don't have to see farmers as just a physical producer. They're part of this bigger image, and it can change consumption there as well. Okay.
Thank you. They're part of a system, really. So it all comes back to this thing that we don't want to work in silos. I mean, farmers are producers, but they are consumers as well. So that's a challenge. Sometimes we're not quite sure how to be dealing with farmers. Are we talking to consumers or are we talking to producers? There was a comment here from someone that is Howard Kivisi. He says he's doing pumpkin seed. He's a young food science and technology graduate at Egerton University. He says he's doing pumpkin seed yogurt. Any insights? That's a question. I don't know whether there's any food technologist person on the panel or anybody that would want to respond to that. But it's good that this is about product development. And obviously pumpkin seed, I remember eating roasted pumpkin seeds when I was a kid. And yeah, haven't gone back there for, ever since, but it would be good to revisit that kind of food. Any comments? So this is about, again, Donald, you mentioned this, that we need to look at how we present and develop new products out of some of these agro, biodiversity type of initiatives. Do we have anyone who would want to comment on that? Otherwise, if not, we can maybe give a link or something to Howard that would help him. Okay, there was a question I was trying to see here. We're almost getting to the end, but the issue of data, that came through quite a lot in a lot of the presentations. The whole issue, I mean, we had the digital sort of solution for health and nutrition data, but there's also all sorts of other information that we need to monitor the situation of food and nutrition security, household level, it could be community level. Does anybody want to comment on that before I ask the panelists to maybe have 30 seconds of parting shots? Any comment on the issue of data and how we track performance on food and nutrition security? Or is it straightforward? We know the issues there, but how do we make sure that there is adequate data to be able to make decisions on? And a good example was from Opa, where she was talking about the gender assessments that they did, which obviously informs decisions on programming, but even at policy level, that's an important issue to bring on board. Okay, I guess maybe it's a straightforward issue. So let me come back to the panelists. As promised, I'm going to start with Opa. If you can give us a 30 sort of second or less parting shot, take home point coming out of this, what you presented, as well as what came out of the meeting from today's deliberations.
Thank you so much for this time again. I just want to highlight the importance of putting gender at the center stage of food and nutrition security. So just to encourage the team here on the call and everyone else that let's do a thorough gender analysis in all the work that we are doing in food systems, in food and nutrition security, so that we are able to really bring out the different vulnerabilities, to be able to target those who are most vulnerable, and by the end of the day, we'll be able to really achieve food and nutrition security. So for me, gender equality is key. Gender analysis is very important to understand the different needs of men, women, boys, and girls, and be able to address these when we are doing our different food and nutrition security interventions. Thank you very much for the time.
Okay, thank you, Opa. Nathan, any sort of parting shots?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I guess one parting shot we have is as we move forward with our data collection platform, we're going to be moving from sort of the small scale pilot to scaling into new areas. So for any of you that are interested in using this type of platform, please go ahead and please contact me. We're looking for partners that have sort of nutrition-focused interventions. We'd like to use this tool to sort of track the impact of those interventions as well as to improve the tool moving forward. Anyway, thanks a lot, Simba and Panapan.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. And Joanna, my apologies. We somehow didn't manage to get time to look at that video. But what would be your parting, shot here, just in a few seconds?
Yes, thanks, Simba. I posted a link to the video if anyone wants to see it, and it's an example of a way to communicate about foods. But my parting message would just be one message. The biggest point, I think, is to make sure any solutions any of us are working on, and we're all in this field, has that smart food triple bottom line. Good for you, good for the planet, good for the farmer.
Good. Thank you, Joanna. And Justify, let's go back to the agro biodiversity, but you can comment or say anything on any subject that we covered today, something to take home. Is Justify still on? Okay, maybe, I'm not sure if he's still on. Maybe Donald, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Simba, and thank you very much, Pranapan, for this opportunity to share our experiences as Harvest Plus on bringing more nutritious staples to vulnerable communities. I think, as I have outlined, as we have discussed today, the default setting for most vulnerable communities is calories, starchy foods. So how can we make them more nutritious? I think biofortification is a real viable option, because we believe that biofortification can protect these vulnerable communities in the future, in the face of any shocks, in the face of pandemics such as COVID. And we believe that biofortification makes foods more resilient in terms of micronutrient intakes, helping to build stronger immune systems. And even when other shocks hit, we know that these communities will have quite a resilient immune system. And even if when they default to going back to staples, they will continue to be able to at least take in some of those much needed micronutrients. However, we need to act now. We need to act now before the situation gets worse. We need to increase investments in this nutrition sensitive intervention, not only biofortification, but others that have been spoken about today. Thank you very much, and it was a great pleasure to be part of this dialogue.
Thank you, Donald. And we'll finish off with Joshua, if you can give us a parting shot, real, microseconds, if you like. What's the take home?
Thank you, Simba. Thank you, all the participants. For me, what has come out very clearly is that any intervention in wake of COVID-19 should be able to target the family level, but not only once, but there must be that intervention that will be able to give resilience. But now what has also come out, the second one is, I would really be looking forward for technologies, digital technologies that can actually be able to monitor nutrition status for anybody and be able to collect that information. And because we have seen data is the main impediment in terms of monitoring these. Those are my two things that I can be able to draw from this conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Joshua, and thank you very much all the panelists for those, for that wisdom. This brings us to the end of our time. I would have wanted to do some reflections, but I think you'll agree that our panelists have ably done that. I'll probably borrow from Joanna's, 3 principles that we need to observe. And that is that whatever interventions we are deploying, we must actually apply the smart food criteria, that it's good for us. Therefore, we're looking at nutrition. You can extend that to go also to cultural issues, and also whether it's good for the planet. In other words, we're looking at resilience and also mitigation issues. And finally, that the farmers obviously must get some benefit out of it. So good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. So I think yeah, that will be the slogan. It really summarizes all the issues that we discussed, all the interventions that were proposed. And so thank you very much to everyone, and to all the participants for staying on. We really appreciate it that many of you were able to come back today. Remember that we still have a third day, which is tomorrow. And tomorrow is going to focus on capacity strengthening. Those are some of the issues, of course, that prevent us from delivering on nutrition, on climate smart agriculture, on resilience. It could be that we don't have enough capacities, both from institutions as well as at individual and household level. So there will be a number of capacity issues that are going to be discussed, with the backdrop of course, there's always COVID behind us, casting a shadow, but also we have targets in terms of nutrition that we have committed to, either through Malabo or whether SDG, Agenda 2030, all these things are still waiting to be done. As Josh said, we need, and Donald also said, we need to act now. They say the best time to have planted a tree was probably 20 or 30 years ago, but the next best time is now. So with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This brings us to the end of our session for today. I don't know if there is any housekeeping from the support team before we close the day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.